Welcome, dear listeners and watchers of the Roll of a Tangent podcast. With me once again in this trifecta of minds. Ooh, there you go. This is off the top of my head. Is Robert Gibson, XJ, and myself, Nikita Zuev. Hello. Tonight we have a special story, one that was made by one of the three of us. This is not the first time, of course, on the podcast. Has transpired, but it is always exciting to review work and destroy the work of fellow colleagues. Here is the summary of the tale. It in the bleak fjords at the northern edge of the kingdom, an ancient settlement beside a mysterious lake ekes out an impoverished existence. A dispossessed scholar who was ousted from his position at the Collegium, Master Crane, came to the settlement in a desperate bid to find traces of an old legend to prove his relevance and win back his title and prestige. Wispy as the fog that enveloped the lake, the scholar spent countless days searching for the creature of legend, the Coiled Serpent. He, his efforts were all in vain, as the Coiled Serpent only responded to great need, and Crane was judged wanting. A tragedy befalling an orphan boy gave Crane the opportunity he needed to summon the enigmatic castle in which the coiled serpent was said to reside, and Crane seized this opportunity. Standing amidst the biting cold before the lake, the orphan boy, besides Crane, called out to the coiled serpent, and the castle manifested itself. The duo entered the castle, gained audience with its master, and the boy petitioned the coiled serpent for his deepest desire to be fulfilled. All things come with a price, however, and some things are dearer than most. Dun dun dun. Yeah, actually, I want to give the word to you in this instance as the writer.
Yes, thanks for the intro, Nikki.
No problem.
It feels very odd to be reading a summary of your own story, so I appreciate you taking the reins.
No problem.
So I wrote this short story, and the aim is to submit it again to another magazine, and hopefully you guys can, the audience, all of you, can follow me while I get rejected yet again, and then we will go through the rejection letter and improve on it. And part of the reason I'm doing this is because I'm pretty established in my field. Not really boasting, it's just a statement of fact. I've been working on VFX for quite a while now, and it's very refreshing to start at the beginning of the ladder again. I feel when I send my resume and my demo reel, I usually get a hearing, and things don't work out in terms of jobs, less from my the quality of my work, and more from just scheduling purposes and negotiation breakdowns. It's very different to start from the beginning, where nobody knows who you are and you have no credibility, and every time you send something, people just say no. Okay, that's about it from me. I'm gonna hand it over to Nikki and Rob, and let them talk about the short story.
Yeah, I
Robert?
I would like to. Well, there's quite a lot I've got to say about this. Firstly, I think the horror in the story is most effective, and I would classify it as a subgenre of horror called simply shock. I would call it a shock story. The without going into details about the plot, the fact that when it's thought that somebody has been rescued, and it turns out that what's happened is not a rescue, it's much worse. I also would like to make comparisons with other works of literature simply because it's a way of, in a way, praising the story without going into too much detail. It reminds me of other stories, for example, Sheridan Le Fanu's The Haunted Baronet, where somebody drowns and is revived, and it's pretty obvious that the personality and maybe the soul of the revived person was different from that of the drowned person. And that's really creepy, and as in the Sheridan Le Fanu story. To make another comparison, this time with science fiction, the idea of a scholar who's trying to retrieve his fortunes by finding something that nobody else has found has echoes of The Last Days of Shandakor by Lee Brackett, which is set on Mars. And there's just two examples. And I don't mind saying lots of disjointed things about the tale, because if the object is to get people interested, then they're going to get more interested, I think, if one dots around. And I'm going to dot around again by saying that one of the things that interests me about the story is the idea, the reason behind Master Crane's dismissal from the Collegium. There's an intriguing reference in the story to the study of history being supplanted by the study of archaeology, as though the people in the Collegium were more interested in counting bits of pot shards in excavations than they were in taking a broad view of history. Now that point isn't developed in this particular story, but I can imagine that if there were other stories set in the same world, then that would be a very good theme for one of them. Now the sort of religious background or the legendary background of the story also, a lot can be developed from that. The ideas of the shimmering curtain, which in some contexts is like the gates of death, and in other contexts in the same story seems to be an actual physical land from which the ancestors of the protagonists came in ancient
Yeah,
time.
very similar to Greek mythology, where the river Styx is an actual river, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, I
in
wasn't
the
aware of
ancient world. Yeah, yeah, it
that.
is.
Yeah.
There you go. You're welcome.
Yeah.
And the Mount Olympus is a real mount. It is
Yes.
real mountain.
Yes. Well, in that case, in Mount Olympus, I suppose they thought, since it's the highest mountain in Greece, they thought actually the gods might physically live there.
Yeah.
So there's no kind of tension there. Whereas in XJ's story, I would like to know more, and perhaps in other stories one will learn more about how the shimmering lands are geographical and also separated by the boundary between life and death. Maybe it's like in the legend of the Garden of Eden, that there's a flaming sword now, which means you can never go back.
Hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, those are points that occurred to me.
Awesome. Yeah. What I find the most exciting when listening to Robert, whenever he gives feedback to either of us, is the fact that he always gives reasons to write more. And it was my heart. I just wanted to say that before I
Mm.
talk about the Coiled Serpent. That the way you talk about these elements and how they could be further used, always, um, you know, seems to be genuine and very inspiring. So
That's because I'm
I
so
hope,
greedy. You see, I want more. I always want. I love,
yeah,
I love a twist. I want more.
I feel you. Yeah. So I hope actually it feels the same way when he hears this
Mm.
kind of words.
Mm.
The Coiled Serpent. So there was a lot of interesting dimensions in the story. The before mentioned horror, that is laced throughout the tale and sort of expands in a blooming flower, if you get the reference. Um, it it becomes stronger and stronger as it goes on. And to me, honestly, this is the way best fantasy should be written. Because if you are going to take the unimaginable into the world of mortal men and women and so on and so forth, um, you have to live with the ramifications of what these fantastical things would be. Some of them are quite benign and beautiful and would really make your life better, but a lot of these elements would actually be very horrifying, terrifying even, and that can be seen in the Coiled Serpent, the consequences of interacting with such things. When it comes to the main character, I think Master Crane is very well established. I can see his motivation. I got the same feeling from him that I had when we reviewed the Lost Hearts, the M.R. James story. Oh, I think it's just Lost Hearts. I keep adding the.
Hearts, yeah.
It is just Lost Hearts. I just realized. But yes, the main antagonist in that, right? Who's the mansion owner? He has these ambitions, and to me, there was this same tint of ambition in Crane that could be seen almost immediately once we saw him. The way how his reluctance in the passages, his desire for more knowledge, his spite for being thrown out of Collegium, and so on and so forth. A lot of these elements paint a picture for you, a very good picture of the type of character he is and what he may be doing. I think all of the characters in the story that are focused on like old Bertha and the boy, they all have very good characterization. I think my biggest my biggest criticism, I have two, but my biggest criticism is the ray guns that you introduced in the middle of the tale. Actually, I mean, you know what? No, I'm kidding. There are no ray guns
Ray
in
gun?
the
What? That was a bazooka, man.
oh my bad. Yeah, sorry, the bazookas. No, all right. There is no such thing in the tale. It's a red herring, as they call it. The It's separated into 5 sections, and the second section at the very end, it has a big exposition, and this exposition gives you a lot of detail on exactly what is happening, and the motivation of one of the key characters. And I feel like that hunk of rock at the end of that second part, in that 5 section, it was a little bit insurmountable. I have come up with several ways that you could sort of move it around or dilute it further inwards into the story, where it's not that big of a like jump, but to me it just felt like um, it felt like I wanted to eat this cake. Right, I've got this cake in front of me, and I grabbed it and I put way too much in my mouth. Right, and now I'm sort of faced with shame that I can't really spit out this cake and I have to swallow it. Right, so it's like it was hard to chew a little bit, even though it was nice. I want this exposition. I want to know why this character is doing this and what's going to happen next. The precursor. I feel like it either came too early, too late, or it could be dispersed. All 3 of these ways of improving this particular section um, work in my mind, right? But still, it doesn't take away from the tale, right? It's more the fact that it was that one thing that my brain focused on when I was reading it for the first and second time, where I felt like I'm running and then I slow down a little bit and I keep running. The pace sort of dies a little, right? Otherwise, when it comes to the pace, I only have good things to say. I really like the days, how they're going by, how, when we're going into the, the main spectacle of the story, it sort of expands greatly. And there's this, the moments are literally frozen in time, and then we pick up again, and it's like a roller coaster. That was great, right? But there's a big rock in this roller coaster. There you go. That's my big criticism. I've got a bunch of I've got one other small one, but I'll save it for now. And I just want to hear from Akshay. What was in your mind when you were writing this story?
Not much.
Ray guns and bazookas.
Yeah, ray guns and bazookas. Okay, just kidding. So I want to address the really interesting point that Rob brought up, actually, with the history being supplanted by archaeology and that particular thing. So one of the things that when I visualize Crane and his character, I went into a lot of trouble to make him very, very condescending towards the people in the settlement. And he thinks of them as very backwards and primitive and can't keep up with the times. But you know what? Crane himself couldn't keep up with the times. That was the thing with the history and archaeology bit. And it's a little bit like the history of science when alchemy was being supplanted by chemistry, and in this particular context, archaeology just had a little bit more evidence to back up their findings and stuff like that. And I chose the names just off the top of my head. I didn't really put too much thought in that. Yeah. It was just like if I revisit this world, I think it would be interesting to explore that tension in the Collegium. I actually don't know how to pronounce that word.
Collegium is how I pronounced it.
Collegium.
Yeah. G is hard in Latin.
Collegium. In the Collegium, that would be an interesting conflict between the two. And there's actually a section all the way towards the end that I cut out. It didn't make it to the final cut. That I think would have laid the grounds for that.
It always happens. You always delete something. You're like, oh man.
I enjoy cutting more than I enjoy putting things in. I gotta admit.
You're a crazy person.
Okay, but I suppose I'll come. I suppose I can come to that later if the conversation goes that way. But yeah. So to touch on to Nikki's point, actually, I disagree with you. The pacing is not good. Like the pacing of the whole story was just terrible, to be honest.
Well, you wouldn't know. I mean, you wouldn't know. You're just the author.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, when I wrote the thing, I think my biggest mistake was I tried to do too much.
Oh, okay,
yeah. And so I came to a point where I had so many stuff that I needed to cram in to make the story seem like it would have some logical flow. Because one of the things that I really tried to do this time round, because I'm submitting it to the same magazine, was to take to heart the reason for their first rejection, which is that there is.
Well, it doesn't start in a tavern. That's true.
Oh, definitely, it didn't start in a tavern. No, but the second thing is that they wanted to be brought into the shoes of the character, right? So I quite literally did a first-person narrative this time around, and you are stuck in Crane's shoes whether you like him or not. That's first of all. That's
I like the
first
fact that we don't like him, by the way.
Oh,
Hmm.
I
that
don't
is
like I don't like writing heroes, man.
Well, good. You know, it makes the story more interesting that he is not likable.
Yeah.
It would be way, it would be way less interesting if he was this nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Like, because I did go out of my way to make Crane unlikable, so it worked.
Yeah, it's great.
So the thing is, originally I had wanted to go flow more into the shoes of old Bertha, as well. Not so much Dagon, but definitely I wanted to flow to bring up more of old Bertha's internal state. The problem is, as I wrote, I found, oh my god, I can't do this because it's the story just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So I cut out her part entirely and show her only from like the third person point of view, which is from Crane. And I think like I just added too much lore into the thing. I feel like I could have done a lot less, and also like the theme I was struggling with. There are two things that I really struggled with when I was working on this story. One is the theme. Like last week, we talked about the conquering wheel, and I don't know if you guys remembered. I asked you guys whether this transmogrification thing, matum psychosis thing.
Yeah.
Matum psychosis thing is a common theme in Western literature. And the reason I asked that was because actually while I was already finishing up the story, and then that here comes another story about the dead taking over a living body, right? Returning back from the dead. And I was trying to marry that theme in, and it just proved to be very tricky to do without. I had wanted it to be a lot more subtle than the shock horror that you mentioned, Rob. So in that respect, I failed quite a bit. And the other thing that I was trying to do is I was trying to go for a specific diction, like a flow, and I don't think I quite grasped it. It was supposed to be late 19th century English diction, but I don't think I quite grasped it. Yeah.
I think the diction is fine. And I think also the decision to, if it was a definite decision to go for shock horror rather than subtle build-up, was also fine, given the length of the story. If you go to for a subtle build-up, you've got to have a much longer story, and
True.
that involves.
Well, you have to have the build-up start like from word 5, right?
Yeah.
You can still do it. It's just really hard if you.
Yeah,
if you
and that was a big problem because I had originally only envisioned this story to be 5,000 words, and it blew up to 50% of that. It's like, oh my god. Yeah.
That's the problem with writing. I agree.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I don't think I handled all that well was a speech from the two kids. I can't quite get into the shoes of children, so I don't think they came out very childrenly at all.
Well,
I mean, those are quite the small shoes to fill. So you know.
Yeah, I don't.
Many adults just can't.
No, I mean, if you were writing about children today, you'd have to use the word "like" in just about every.
Oh my god! No. You'd have to use your favorite word that you've learned from this podcast: poggers.
Poggers. Yeah. Oh
my. Okay. Anyway, I was about to spoil the story. Karen.
The characterization of the two kids, right towards the end, between Dagon and his sister Elma, was I covered it up with big drama, you know. I
Well, that's
covered
all
it.
right.
I covered it up with big drama
Mm.
because
It-
I couldn't do
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
it works for me. I think it
it
worked for Rob.
works. Yeah, it works. There is one problem I've got with the story. It's not a criticism because you get away with it, but in sooner or later, if you were to write a whole series of stories in this world, you might have to glance at the problem anyway, and that is that it's a sort of historical problem, which is that given the fact that I think Crane says at one point that the castle in the mist, people have been looking for it for a long time, or many people have been looking for it throughout history. At least I get that impression. And just afterwards, thinking about it, I think to myself, well, Crane should have asked himself, as a cautious man who wants to get ahead in life and save his own skin, he should have asked
Cowardly
him,
man would be closer.
yes, yeah. Why he should have said, why do I hope to succeed when so many other people have failed? And then comes the theme that you mention, successful theme that the castle only responds to great need, but presumably some people must have lived to report this fact. And another thing is that the great need was actually felt by Dagon,
Mhm.
and yet Crane also gets taken with him. So it suggests that it's a bit like these teleportation theme in science fiction, where you can teleport yourself and also the clothes you're wearing and maybe the gun that you're holding and perhaps anyone else who happens to be holding on to you at the time. This sort of rule could be explicitly explored in other stories, although you get away with it in this one because there are plenty of ways that the reader can invent excuses or possible
Or
theories.
interpret why indeed he was
Yeah.
teleported, right? Because I
Yeah.
envisioned that as like, oh, okay, so there is, like I felt like maybe the castle is toying with him, and maybe it's trying to create a great need in him to use the castle, right? I had two ideas as to why he got there, but you got a good point there, Robert. I think actually, funnily enough, uh, I could see this short story. Maybe you'd have to add a little bit or cut a little bit, but I think it could fit into my world, into the fantasy world that we're writing the book in. Okay,
Really?
it's dark enough. There's terrible themes of loss. It basically like all you need is for someone to shout Andros.
Shall we
Yeah.
turn it into a D&D module, do you think?
Sure, man. Why not? Master Crane being a very terrible quest giver in that instance.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is someone shouting some profanity. That about
Yes,
it.
Antros
Work.
something. Antros.
Yeah, Andros something. Yeah,
Okay,
indeed.
so that was a great point, Robert, which I will link to when you said when you guys were talking about the physical location of the shimmering curtains and such. So the castle in the mist is also a physical location. Once it manifests, there's really nothing stopping Crane from entering, or anyone else for that matter. Yeah.
Right, got it.
And the shimmering curtains is a semi-mystical physical phenomena. Because like one of the things I was trying to do is I was trying to make the story feel very, very cold. Mostly because when I wrote it, I felt very cold. This winter in Canada is unseasonably cold, so I want everyone to share in my misery.
Achievement unlocked.
Cool.
Kara.
Right. Yeah. So I think I overused the word cold and chilled in the story. But also one of I'm not even going to deny that. On the fourth or fifth read through, I was like, man, I really use these two words a lot.
Man, it's really cold here.
Yeah. Yeah,
You could have said cryogenic instead. So
yeah, I
Mm.
probably right. But the other thing I try to do is if you notice, the color scheme in the story is pretty gray. It's white.
Yeah.
The facade of the castle is white granite with blue roofs. The interior of the keep is blue stone, and it's marble. It's made of marble. The flooring is made of
Which is,
marble.
by the way, beautiful. I could really imagine that in my head. That's never went
Thank
away.
you. I went into some effort to craft that. And so like the halo towards the end of the story is silvery, and all of the color scheme I tried to keep it cold. And so the
Yeah.
shimmering curtains is basically an aurora.
right. Ah,
It's like
Interesting.
it's a very literal description of the thing.
Yeah.
I haven't really fully developed what the shimmering curtains really is supposed to be, and I'm gonna leave it that way, because one of the direct influences of this particular short story, like the inspiration, is Elden Ring. I was playing it when I wrote it, and Elden Ring has this very disjointed, fragmentary approach to their lore. And when you drop into the game and you play it, it's like the lore is just like so weird. There is a logic behind all of it, but it's not at all clear to the player what it is. Yeah.
What about the other mystical concept, the sundering light? I get the impression that's more straightly religious and not to do with any physical reality.
That
Yeah,
is
I mean, it's the
definitely
light of Castellan, right?
that is definitely a religious thing. So vaguely in the back of my mind, there was a great disaster way back when, and the sundering light. The sundering light is a physical manifestation of that disaster.
Of that disaster. Oh, I like it.
Yeah,
Very biblical.
Yeah, and I don't quite have an idea what it is. It's not a entity in the same way that the Coiled Serpent is, in the sense that it has a will of its own.
But it is a benevolent thing because Bertha uses it as a sort of invocation to ward off evil, doesn't she?
Yeah.
I haven't really gone that far with its development.
Here is my idea for you, if you haven't gone that far with this development. What if this apocalypse that you're talking about was actually caused by the good guys because they figured out they can't win, right? So it's like, all right, everybody get in the churches. Who got in the churches got in the churches. And all the evil darkness that's like running around in the street, and all the good guys, everybody who's like hasn't gone to the bunker, basically. You know? So it's the terrible thing that saved the world but destroyed most.
If
There you go.
if I develop it further, you'll probably be along those lines, Nikki.
Let's go.
It's a terrible thing that happened to save a bunch of people. Yeah.
I like that. I like the idea of great sacrifice. Okay, so do you want me to tell you how I would try and fix the block?
Actually, I
of
was going
stone?
to ask you guys the question we always ask at the end of a story, which is, how can this be better?
Well, yeah. So that exposition. That is my point. I think other ways you could improve it is maybe start with Crane. You know, not have a bunch of exposition and then a bunch of lines and then get into Crane's mind. Be in Crane's mind from the second paragraph onwards. Make sure that we're there almost immediately, so that we understand that now we are tied to the character, and maybe even, sort of pull a bunch of stuff from beforehand here, just as like, I was sitting there thinking about my colleagues at the Collegium and how much of assholes they are because I'm here now and everything sucks and it's so cold here and I'd rather be at the capital where it's super warm, like where I had my study, but just because they couldn't understand that their progress was destroying what we were building, whatever. Anyway, those damnable fools who are so backwards and can't see progress, and you would immediately get this sort of like, oh, he's a hypocrite, he's terrible, like let's see where this is going. Oh no, he wants to help the children. No, 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 no. And you'd be at the same place, but way quicker and way more tragically. That's
I'll
my
go
improvement.
with that. Maybe not with every word, but I think the general idea, I would say.
There was once on this podcast where you agreed with my every word, and it was when we talked about that story, The Conquering Will. So I cherish that moment, and whenever I feel down, Robert, I look up at the sky and say, well, at least Robert agreed with me. The Conquering Will. It's
It just shows it can happen.
yeah, exactly. It's miracles do happen, as I said back then. Yeah, what about you? How would you make the story better?
That's a very hard question. A very, very hard question. There might be one or two points of style and just, I don't know. If I were, you see, when I write a story, every time I reread it, I change it. I've got the fidgets as far as style is concerned. And I think the only changes I would make, apart from the one you've just said about putting Crane more explicitly right from the word go, I think I'd go for that. But also, I would probably, I can't think of it any offhand, but it would be inevitable if I were rewriting it, I would make some changes just because I'm like that. But I don't think I'd change anything in the plot or the ideas or indeed the dialogue. And the dialogue's fine.
Well, thank you very much. So let me respond to Nikki. Not so much to push back on what you said because I actually agree, but I want to talk about the part at the very end that I cut out, which would probably put this into perspective for you. And the part that not verbatim, but the part that I cut out was thus ended my report on my expedition to the northern reaches of the kingdom. I present this to you, my lord, before my presentation to the Collegium, in the hopes that you would cast a vote in my favor. And imagine, and I'm not going to go into this portion here because it spoiled the story, what you could gain should you fund my further expedition into the fjord, and the fruits of that research should be yours to pluck, or something like that, something along those lines. And with that, it changes what the story actually, the form of it is.
Man, I wish you kept that in.
I cut that out because it was like starting to overflow. Yeah. But it changes the
context.
The context, not the context of the story, but also I think it changes very much the I mean, it makes it even darker, Yeah.
Man, I really wish you kept that in. I'll just say that. I will say nothing else because everything else I'll say will be a spoiler for the story, right? But it improves so much.
It would make it the exact opposite of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, which there the narrator is saying, for goodness sake, don't send any more expeditions.
All right. Well,
this one would be saying, yes, go on, have another expedition.
All right.
I love it, to be honest. It's great.
All right. Well,
man.
Okay, I will put that back in.
Do it, man. Honestly.
Yeah.
Do something with that section too, but also this is definitely it. This elevates it. Like until that line, it's a horror tale. Now Now it's what's it called? It's a horrific true life story, you know? Let me put it like that. You know, it turns into something that I could clearly see happening in the real world. Some person being like, "Oh no, that's terrible. That's awful. What happened?" Anyway, money. How can we make money? Money can
Oh
be made
man,
here.
it's a little bit more than money. Really.
Yes, I know.
No. I mean, as in what Crane? Because I cut it out, so you guys have no idea what I actually said, right? Which can't be helped. But what Crane proposes is even worse than that. It's not just money.
Anyway, regardless, what I mean is to say like exploitation of others' suffering.
No, yeah.
You know, is just, you know, it's a real life horror. And if that was how, like, if I read the story and that was the end, I'd be like,
All right.
terrible, awful. I'm never reading this again, but it's awful. Like, I commend you. I commend you for making me, you know, relive the horrors of the world.
Yes. No escapism here. Nah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
not my thing.
But really, all right. I'll stop talking about how much I like this section. I think that's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
I would give this a story 7.5 out of 10.
Well, thank you. That's very good. Much better than I give myself.
With the ending that you just proposed, I would give it an 8 or an 8.5 even.
Yeah.
I think I'd give it an 8 anyway, partly because
You've been paid by actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because of the comparisons it keeps bringing to my mind. Just for example, the idea that the truth is suddenly much more horrible than anybody realizes. It reminds me of Jack Vance's novel Son of the Tree, where there's a huge tree on a planet and the inhabitants worship the tree. They think they're going to wind up somewhere inside the tree in the afterlife and it'll be all blissful. In fact, it's just a huge creature that eats them. Anyway.
Yikes. Nice.
Yeah.
No,
Well.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Huge creature that eats them. Wow.
Well, they go there, you know, at the end of their lives and they get eaten. So, there you go.
Yeah.
Very nice.
All right. Well, it would be very funny for me to give myself a rating. So I think I'll just skip this point. And over the weekend, well, this is the weekend for us. I will put in the last section. I will clean up the story, put it into standard manuscript format, and then I'll send it to the magazine again and see how it does this time. And we will share the news once they get back to me, which will probably be about 6, 7, 8 weeks. And it will most likely be another rejection, and then we'll see what they say.
The story doesn't start in a tavern.
Yeah, well,
That's our
hey,
first
that's a big improvement, right?
No, I just imagine they've completely changed their foray at this point. And now they're saying it should start in the tavern.
Okay, you should start in the tavern. All right, man. Every
Yeah.
Conan story ever.
That's right. I mean, every best story ever, you could have just said.
Every best story ever. Okay. Well, any last words from the round table, tri-table?
The trifecta. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are many ways in order to create something. And one of the greatest strengths of writing is that you can incorporate other things that exist as mediums into writing. And if you're good enough at describing them, they will make your story even brighter. And you can see that in the Coiled Serpent, because XJ is really good at understanding how architecture and color palettes work, and he makes it shine on the page, right? So
Thank you.
because of You're welcome. So because of his skills in a different field, he can make his writing, shine brighter in some aspects that other authors could not.
Mm. Yeah. Oh,
I cheated actually. I had
Oh.
the map of the new one show. Well, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that Disney castle in Bavaria.
Mm.
The Swan Lake Castle.
Neuschwanstein.
Huh?
Neuschwanstein.
There we go. That I had the plans of the castle on my second screen when I wrote that.
All right, forget what I said. Actually, is a scam.
I'm a scam
And
artist.
everything he writes is terrible. No, okay.
Yeah, I'm a scam artist. But the importance of references, I think.
For sure, definitely, definitely. Yeah.
One-
Any last
one
words,
more,
Robert?
One
Yeah.
more literary comparison. It's with I've thought of it with John Christopher's novel The Possessed, which is set in an alpine ski resort, and some children. I think actually I can't remember if it's one or two children are lost in the snow, and they're given up for dead, and against all expectation they're found again, but their reactions are oddly slow, and you realize that they're in fact not what they seem to be anymore, and it's really spooky. Yes.
Hmm.
So
I like it.
another comparison inspired by XJ's story.
Well, I mean, if I've actually read that story, I should say I would be inspired by that story instead. Yeah. Not
Yeah, I
quite sure
can
what I
recommend.
mean by that, actually. I need more coffee.
No, me neither. Yeah. Let's wrap this up.
Thanks for agreeing with me, Nikki. I love it when you agree with me.
I know it's just like any miracle, it must happen at some point.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all your attention so far. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and follow this adventure as I submit the story to the magazine and see what happens.